Okay. Let me get started. By like show of hands, like thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. What do you guys think of last lecture? Are you guys like confused about React? Like, do you kind of understand what's happening? Or are you guys more of like not sure? Just trying to get a gauge for like how comfortable we are with React in just terms of understanding. Okay. Okay, cool. We're gonna go through a quick recap of what we talked about on Tuesday in React 1. So with React, we learned a couple things. So React is a JavaScript library that's used for building interfaces. And we talked about components, we talked about state, we talked about props, which are all like very useful things that comes with the React library that allows us to build websites very quick and seamlessly. And we also talked about some useful tools like Prettier and ESLint that helps our code just be more readable overall and consistent whenever we're working on a project or sharing our project with others. So we figured out React is pretty cool. And today we're gonna see some pretty cool things and real industry level tools that we actually use with React that makes React so powerful. So I will admit some of these topics might be a little unfamiliar with you guys at first, just because we literally just learned React. So I'll try my hardest to keep it kind of surface level, and we're gonna dive more deeply into this later. So all the stuff I'm talking about right now, you know, if I could just pull your guys' attention for this, maybe we can talk like high level, and then I'll do the last like 30 minutes or like 20 minutes. We can talk about like homework or projects, or like we can get help however you guys want. But I just want to explore some like really cool features with React with you guys. And then we'll be able to, you know, work on whatever we need. So the first topic that I want to talk about today that's really popular in React and what really makes React so useful is routing. Now, we've seen routing before, just a little bit differently. So back in HTML, we used this like A tag. And the A tag, the anchor tag, as you guys remember, we like had some, you know, text and we put some link behind it. So like if you click that text, like it'll send you somewhere. And this was known, or this is known as a router basically. So we actually have worked with routers before, but React does them a little differently, which is why it's interesting. So single page versus multi-page websites. So on Tuesday's lecture, we built single page or SPA web apps using React. So we had like one page and you guys could see like some information on it. We had like a button on there. We had like a list. And way back in HTML, we built multi-page websites using the A tag. But we're going to now introduce React routers. So you might be thinking like, what is a router or what is a React router? So basically, a router is anything that loads a new URL. So when we use the A tag, it basically meant that we would click on some link and it would direct our browser to like a completely different, you know, web page that loaded an entire new URL into our page. And the way React does routing is a bit differently, and it makes the user experience a lot better, and overall is just a lot more of a useful tool rather than the old A tag that we were using before. So the React router is actually a conditional rendering wrapper that only shows you the component associated with the link you've selected or are on. And React routers allow us to display content from another URL onto the same page without reloading. Let me move this real quick. Allowing for a much faster loading and a better user experience. So you guys might be looking at this and you're like, okay, what is he talking about? There's routers, there's like A tags, like what's happening? Let me get to it in a second. But let me first explain something called server-side versus client-side routing. So back when we were using the A tag, that was known as server-side routing. So basically every time we clicked on a new link, what happens is our website actually sends an HTTP GET request to a server wherever our website is stored. So just imagine, we're like using our browser here, and this is our browser, and we're sending a GET request to some server here. And basically, when we send this GET request with a new URL, the server now is like trying to find that URL wherever it's stored, and it's going to send us back an entirely new web page. So that's server-side routing. Basically, we're asking the server, what is happening in this new URL, and it sends us an entirely new document, and it completely wipes whatever we had before and replaces it with some new document that's going to display on our page. So that's server-side routing. And the important thing here is that we're always starting off with a new document. It's completely fresh, and the page is like reloading it. Like you can see it kind of reload, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer to load. And the difference with React is that it uses client-side routing. Now, client-side routing happens when the route is handled internally by the JavaScript that is loaded on the page. So the important thing to note here is that your page actually won't refresh when you use React routers. Now, the reason that's important is because imagine like someone's going through your website, and you make a really big website, and they're trying to go from page to page, and you're trying to like click on someone's profile, and you're trying to like navigate to a new page, to an About Us page, some other page. If there's a lot of data on every single page, it might take, or if you have like slow Wi-Fi, whatever it is, it might take your page a long time to load every single time you want to navigate to a new URL. Now, the reason React is so powerful with React routers is that your page won't refresh. It uses client-side routing to basically just display all the new elements onto that page instead of reloading an entire page as we do with server-side routing. Okay, are there any questions about any of that? Any questions why React is interesting, or why the differences between server-side or client-side routing? Anything? Okay, cool. So the way we use routers, and by the way, like you might be thinking like, what is a router, right? And why is this even relevant? And just imagine, up until this point, we've just been doing single page applications. When we start making multi-page applications, we start building like multiple pages on our site, we want to direct users to like different points in our site. We use routing to basically seamlessly load new information onto every screen based on the current URL. I hope that all makes sense. Okay, and the way we do this is with this command. So I'm going to show you guys a little example. Now, I don't expect you guys to like understand everything at first. Again, I really, really encourage you guys, if you're interested and if you want to learn more, to always look at the lesson content. The lesson content really goes like in depth on a lot of this stuff, and I'm just kind of giving like the high level overview of everything. But the way we actually add React routing to our project is by running this command in our terminal. So let me show you guys an example. And the reason I'm doing an example today and not a demo is because if I were to do a demo, we'd have to create, as you can imagine, like multiple pages and then route between them. I'm just going to show you guys an example of essentially how routing works, but using something that you might be familiar with, which is actually the WDB website. And I'll show you the code that actually works to navigate this website elsewhere. So this is our website, web@berkeley.org. And if you can see, there's like a bunch of links at the top here. We have some content like being displayed on this page, like that's cool. We can look at like projects, decal, about us. But what's interesting here? The interesting thing is that if you notice the URL is actually changing, right? It's saying /projects, /join us, about us, but the page isn't refreshing. If a page refreshes, it looks like this, right? The whole thing loads again, and then you get a refresh. But the reason why React is so interesting is because your page won't actually refresh it'll just automatically load everything from one URL onto your page without reloading your entire page. And that's the beauty of client-side routing, or yeah, client-side routing versus server-side routing. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about anything I just talked about? Okay. Now, this is what's happening behind the scenes. So if we look at, let's say we have some app here. We saw this on Tuesday when we were like making our first React app. We have some app here that's loaded in some kind of like index.js, and that index.js is inserting our JSX into our index.html page, which is eventually being loaded into our website. So the app is where like all of the good stuff is happening, where all the juicy stuff is happening. And after we run that command in our terminal, we're going to import this line right here from React router DOM. And again, this is part of the beauty of React, right? We're not coding everything from scratch. If we did everything with like A tags and we were like setting up routing like that, it would take us a really, really long time. And we want to utilize all the libraries that are available for us in React, which is what makes it such a great tool for building websites, is because we can just, import some library that's already out there for us to make routing really easy. And it's just going to work as we intended to. So here in app, you guys can see we defined some functional component, and we're calling it app. And again, we can define two different types of components: class components, which are a bit out of date, which we don't use anymore, and functional components, which Nitya talked about on Tuesday, which is basically it's the same thing as a class component, except we just store it as a function, as an arrow function. And as you guys can see, we use a capital letter to indicate functional components, or just components in general, which is telling React that this page is a component and it can be imported and we can use it as a component in other pages. Okay, so we start off with our app, and as we saw on Tuesday, we're returning some like HTML/JX, what we call JSX. And we first start off with the browser router. So this is like the parent tag of all of our routing techniques and what we're going to be using to route different pages, route our page to different pages. So we start off with browser router, and we start off with like some big div element, which we're going to put all of our HTML in. And there's a couple other stuff here. If you guys are familiar with this, back in HTML, we talked about lists. So this is like some type of list, and we have some list items here. And this first list item, we're saying link to, we're putting like some slash here, and then home and some text. You guys are thinking like, what is this? It'll all make sense in a second. And then we're saying another link to, it's doing some like slash about, and we're calling it about. And then we're also doing another link to users, and we have some text users there. And at the bottom is what makes all of this HTML route properly. So we start off with some switch tag, and now we're saying we have some about us page, and it's defined somewhere in our source folder, right? So we're in our source folder right now, and we see that there's an app. If you guys are like not too sure what I'm talking about, open up your VS Code from Tuesday and just see the file structure. And inside the source folder, you're going to have your app. And your app is saying that we have some components that are in the source. We have about, users, and home. And these components, you can imagine, are just this page right here. So imagine we created this whole page as a component, and now it's just sitting somewhere in our source folder. And we have some other home component, which is this component right here. And so now we're trying to tell our website to route where we want it to route. depending on what the user clicks on. So what the HTML is saying here is that we're linking home to essentially a backslash. And what this means is that our default router is always going to be the home page. Because if you don't have anything after a backslash, your backslash is like, think of it as like your base link. Like that's where the root of all your projects are, are going to be coming from, or like the root of your links is just starting with the backslash. So if there's nothing after it, the URL is automatically going to default to home. And if there's some about after it, it's going to route to the about page. And if there's some users after it, it's going to route to the users page. And basically what we're doing here, I talked about conditional wrapping. So every time the user clicks on this about component or the about right here that we listed as a link, what our project is going to look at is going to say, okay, where is this linking us to? It's linking us to some slash about, and we're setting the route of this path to be slash about, which is basically saying every time you click on this about, link button, whatever it is, it's going to automatically open up this component that we created and we have stored inside of our source folder. So when we click on this about button in the WDB page, it automatically navigates us to here. And the reason for that is because we set the route of this text right here to send us back the about us component, which is why now it's rendering on our page. So again, I understand that this might all be really complicated for you guys because we just started React on Tuesday, but I promise the more you work with this and the more we develop multi-page applications, it's all going to make sense. I just hope today is kind of like a good introduction to intuitively understanding what routing is and what we can use in React to create really fast applications and just create an overall better user experience than we were in HTML. Okay. Are there any questions about anything I talked about? Yeah.
So like the switch tags and route tags are already implemented for us, and like the about tag and users tags, like those tags we are implementing ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason we know that too is because, well, first of all, let's just say that we do have an about us page that like we created, but just by looking at the code, right, you have some switch tag and it's being closed here. And common convention for opening up a component is this like self-contained tag where you have like an about and then a slash with a closing tag and / with a closing tag. So that's how you know that's kind of like a component we defined ourselves. And the switch is something that comes from React, or actually what we downloaded with the React router DOM. And so we're basically just using this library to set our own routes to the components that we already created ourselves. So when we start building out like really big applications and we have like a bunch of different pages, or maybe like one page links to another page, links to another page, we're going to be utilizing routes and routers to effectively route our entire website seamlessly and just give our users like everything they want as they click on different links and just opening up new components that we created. And again, the reason this is important is because when you look at our website, you can see that everything just loads automatically. It's super fast. I can scroll like really fast through it, and I don't have to wait for every page to load every time I open up something new. It's already loaded for me in the client side, and I'm not sending any requests to the server. Now, there are a few pros and cons with this, which we can get into later. I'll talk about them a little bit now if you're interested, but again, you guys can always read them in the lecture notes. They're always have like extensive overviews on everything I just talked about, but there are some pros and cons with client-side routing, because like right now you might be looking at this and you're like, well, like client-side routing is obviously way better than server-side routing because like it's way faster. The only like caveat here, I mean, there are a few other ones. But a big one is that, let's say you're trying to do like SEO optimization, which is basically like search engine optimization. So if you like just created a website and you like publish it, the problem with client-side routing is that it might not show up in your like in terms of like search engines. And the reason for that is just because the web was like historically built on server-side routing. And there's like a couple technicalities there, which is why server-side routing is actually better for like showing up your page if you want to like have it show up. And there's different techniques there where you can actually set different pages to have different types of routing, which is like also another advanced topic. For instance, like I can set one page to have server-side routing and another page to have client-side routing. But it gets pretty nuanced. But again, all you guys need to know is that React, we have client-side routing, we have React routers that basically just make the user experience really nice and fun for anyone that's interacting with our websites. Okay. Are there any questions on anything I just talked about related to routers? Because I'm going to move off of them for a little bit and we'll get back to them sometime soon. I promise you, and you guys will definitely be working on them inside of like your homeworks, your projects, and definitely in your final project, you guys will have like a bunch of different routers and they'll be going to like different pages and whatnot. But intuitively, I hope you guys just have a good understanding of like what routers are and why they're fun and why they're useful and why React is like, again, such an awesome tool. Okay. Cool. Now I'm going to move on to another topic. The rest of the topics I'm about to talk about today are not so much related with like switching pages, but more so styling in a specific component. So one thing I'm going to talk about is CSS in JS. So React is something known, or we are going to start using something called CSS modules. And the reason they're different from just like regular CSS, files that we create and import is because CSS in JS means that we basically are using an alternative method of styling than just plain CSS files, such as like styled components or CSS modules. And the reason we use this is because all CSS in our React app is global. So if you can imagine, we have like page 1 and page 2, and then we import some page 1 CSS into page 1. If we have two different CSS files that essentially use the same like class names and stuff, we're going to have something known as like Css Collision, where basically both CSS files are targeting one specific class and they're giving it different attributes. And our React is like, our website's going, it's like, what's going on? I have like two different information sources telling me to set one color blue and one color red. So it kind of can get messy. And the reason why CSS modules are cool is because basically it transforms your CSS files from being globally scoped to being component scoped, which means that the CSS you import into your component only affects the component that you're working on there. So as you guys can see here, like before, we had like some styles.css. So forget this like module word here, but if we had like some style CSS file and we're like importing it into like, let's just say like some app.js file, then that CSS was essentially going to act as like a global CSS, and it's going to influence all of the styling and all of the elements that we define, not only in that page, but also in other pages. So essentially what module does is it's saying, instead of influencing all the CSS globally by importing this CSS into your JS file, what we're going to do is we're importing the CSS, but it's only going to influence this JS file. So from here on out going forward, it's just good practice to set your CSS files as module. So basically you have like some name, like styles or like index or like home or like about us page, and you set .module.css. And then when you import this into your class, it's basically just going to say, I'm only influencing this class and not other classes. And again, what you guys can do if you want to have like one universal CSS file, you guys obviously can import it the same way we did before with like without the module, and it'll influence like everything that we use and all the components that we build. But module is just telling it that we're only going to influence this component, which is why, again, it's a cool React thing, and just learning new tools and like new ways to diversify components and like build them in a fun and interactive way. Okay. Any questions about CSS modules? Okay. So I'm kind of jumping onto another topic here, and I know this might be all like a lot of information being thrown at you guys, but again, this is all, I hope you guys just have like an intuitive understanding of what's happening here. I'll go through a demo at the end, demoing a lot of the stuff we talked about. But right now, I just hope you guys can understand some overview of what I want to go through. So style components are essentially writing CSS in JS alongside HTML, but you don't have to inline the CSS. So again, we can import this by writing this in our terminal. And this is essentially what it looks like when we're trying to code it. So let's say we want to write some like hello world, and we're rendering it onto our page, and like we're returning it inside some component. So basically what I can actually do here is I can define some like title as a styled H1, and I can reset or give some parameters that aren't like naturally or just given by the H1 styling. So essentially I can set like the font size to that. I can align it to center. I can give it a color, and then I can also define some variable wrapper, and I'm going to make it capital to kind of like be like a component essentially. I'm giving it some padding and I'm giving it some background. And then when I'm returning it, I'm saying hello world inside of this like kind of title component that we just created. But the reason it's different, it's essentially an H1 tag, except we just gave it some CSS elements. So again, this is another way of like kind of writing CSS in line per se. It's not necessarily in line because we're like predefining it, but it's another methodology of like giving CSS styles to your components. Are there any questions about this stuff? Again, this is just another way of giving your page like some CSS attributes. It could be interesting for you. It also could not be interesting. I mean, you guys might just prefer style sheets instead and importing them, but there's another way to do it. Yeah.
That code, where do we?
Yeah, I mean, you can use it wherever you want. So whenever you're defining a component, like let's just say that, you know, here, let me open up actually. Let's see if I have. Okay, so on Tuesday, we defined like this app here, and we kind of like set some variables, and then we were returning some HTML or like some JSX. So yeah, if we want to define some styled components, essentially what we can do is we can say like, we can define it here, like above in the JavaScript section of our function. And then when we return it, so let's just delete all this we have this far. So let's copy down what we have here. We're saying here. Okay. We have some title, which is like some styled H1. So some styled H1, we're going to backtick, and then we're going to say, just for the sake of time, let's just say text align, and then we're going to set it to center. And then as you guys remember, obviously H1 tags, they automatically have text aligned to the left. So basically we're just defining a new style of an H1 tag where text is aligned to the center instead of to the left. We can save this. And then let's make some wrapper component. And let's say, or we're going to set the padding. Actually, let's do the background. I've never seen this color before, but papaya whip, I guess, is the color. And then also just to make sure that we have that we can use this. Oops. I have to download this by running this command. This allows our project to use styled components. And then in this return, I'll do this while NPM is downloading it. We're going to set some wrapper tag, which we literally just defined here. Oh, let's see. Styled. Okay. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to debug this in the break. But essentially what we're doing here is we're just like creating some styled components. We're just changing some like default attributes in H1 and then creating kind of like a component within our app component. And then we're using it when we're returning it in the JSX by simply returning that component we created and then typing in some text here. And then if I ran this, it would essentially put hello world, but it would just override the default attribute of aligning it to the left. And it would align the text to the center. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. This is kind of like the last topic for today. We're going to talk about component libraries. And here for a lot of the front end that you guys are going to be doing, I mean, this is where the UI really like comes together for when you're developing websites. I mean, this is like hands down, I think for, you know, for front end usage, component libraries, just like importing some component library and using their like default styling and like default components is really going to help you speed up your process of like developing. And it's also not going to make everyone have to turn into a designer to make their website look nice. You can essentially just download some component library with a bunch of predefined components and then use them and utilize them in different ways. Maybe give some different attributes to kind of give your own flavor to them, but at the same time, use it to really speed up your process of building a website. So what is a component library? A component library is a UI, or a UI component library is a set of ready-made UI components, such as like buttons, inputs, dialogues, and so on. And they basically serve as the building block for layouts. So popular component libraries for React include like React Bootstrap, Theme UI, and Chakra UI. Now, when you're building projects, you're going to import certain React or like component libraries that are essentially going to help like just speed up your development process. And there's a lot of different ones out there and a lot of different reasons why you might use one library over another. But today, sorry, one more question you might be asking is like, why use component libraries? Again, I just talked about it. And this is the same reason, like this is literally the exact same slide I had when I said why use React in the first place, right? It's like, why wouldn't you just use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and like make all your websites? It's because like, it'll take you a really long time. I showed you guys the example of like that toolbar. If I did it in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, it would take me like days just to add in like 8 components. And then if I want to add in like 9, 10, and like the 11th component or like some like link in that toolbar I was trying to make, it would take me like another 5 hours. So again, React libraries are just a way to make your life easier by importing already like ready-to-made libraries or just like using predefined things that are out for like that are already set for you to utilize when you're building your websites. And this is the same idea with component libraries. So it basically just makes your life easier. Let's say like I wanted to build some button and I wanted every single button of mine to have like, some, like if we're building a regular button might just look like this. And we might just have like, might just be like a regular button, right? And we're like, honestly, this is like pretty boring. What if we want to have like, like a little shadow behind it or something? Or let's say we wanted to make this button red. Or let's say like we wanted to make it like rounded, We'd have to change all of those elements in like a CSS folder, import that CSS file. And then for every single differentiation of a button I want to make, I have to then recreate some button or set a new class name, then target that class name in the CSS and then write something there. It's just a lot of hassle. So like how we did it before, yes, it was like cool. And we could like, name a whole bunch of buttons and a whole bunch of text and give it one style. And we made them all red. And that's like great and fun. But if you're developing out like a really big website, sometimes you don't want to go through and develop every single intricacy for every single, style, button, header. You kind of just want like a default library already set there for you, and then maybe change and tweak like a few elements here and there. So all these different libraries will give you a different spread of UI components. So one library might be like more well adapted in like one type of component, right? Like let's say one library is really good at giving you like video effects, components, and you can like, I saw the other day like a video. I don't know. I just watch like React videos on YouTube sometimes, and there was like this one React library where you can basically edit like your own videos in React, which I thought was like pretty cool. It's like they have predefined components to basically load in your videos and then like edit your videos in there. And that's the same idea for like basic component libraries. Basically, if I want to like import a component library and have a bunch of predefined sets of things, that's what I can do. So I'm actually going to show you guys a demo of my favorite component library and literally something I use every single day in the industry, which is Chakra UI. So let me start a new project. And also I would encourage you guys to go along with me on this one because it won't be too complicated. There won't be that much code, but you guys can like really see the power of component libraries and why it makes your life so easy. So let's go into tests. Okay. Now, forgot to create a React app. Let's go in real quick. It says create React app, my app. Okay, cool. So let's run this command again. We've seen this before. Instead of naming it my app, I'm just going to name it Chakra example. I'm going to run this command. Okay. And like as this loads and as we're creating our website, y'all have any questions on anything I talked about today in terms of like cool things we can do, styling, component libraries, routers? Yeah. Yeah. So that was kind of, so there's two different workarounds I mean, there's many different workarounds, but I was just kind of elaborating on two main workarounds that we use with globally imported style sheets. So one, which you're referring to, is essentially you're talking about style components, right? Where like we're setting our own style within. This is what you're referring to. Yeah. So there's a couple workarounds. So one thing, yeah, you can do instead of like defining a CSS style sheet and like importing it, and it's going to change a bunch of things, you can use styled components. And then the other workaround I mentioned earlier are essentially CSS modules, where it's CSS style sheets, but when you import them, they only interact locally in that component scope. So yeah, they're kind of two different things. Like regular CSS style sheets, when you import them, they're gonna work globally. But the reason why CSS modules are different is you literally just define the file. Instead of styles.css, you do styles.module.css. And then when you import it into some JavaScript file, it's only gonna work inside of that component. Does that make sense? So they're basically just two different styles of workarounds. I mean, they're not necessarily workarounds, they're just two ways of doing something that you can use on a case-by-case basis, right? So if I was like working on some team or some project, or I wanted to build some website, and I wanted like all the styles to fit, like I had a very, well thought out, all my styles were like already there, and I wanted like every button to be red with like a shadow, and I wanted this to be that and this to be that, then I can just make one style sheet and then set everything to that, right? Or if I'm like, I want every component to be different, and I want every component to have some, some like, and I'm reusing class names. The biggest problem with like globally, with like global style sheets is essentially like if I have multiple style sheets and I'm importing them for different pages, let's say in like one page, I have some class name called like button. And then in another component, I think like, oh, I'm only defining one class name button inside of this JavaScript file. What's actually happening is that you have two CSS files. They're both targeting the class name button. And so therefore you're going to get a CSS collision because both are trying to tell that button to essentially follow that ID or that class name to essentially follow those styles that we defined in two different style sheets. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. But again, they're for different use cases. So styled components are just like really helpful if we want to, like not worry too much about the CSS and the attributes behind it. We just kind of like work on a bunch of stuff, and we want to like use pre-existing libraries. And then when we're doing CSS modules, this is more of like we defined our own CSS style sheets and we want to import them in. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Any other questions, by the way, before I hop into this demo? Okay. That's cool here. All right, cool. Okay. So I'm now in my folder. Let's run npm start just to see what happens. Okay. It opens up a page when it loads. Okay, cool. This is exactly what we saw yesterday. It's like the default create React app, and React is just like throwing a bunch of stuff in here. Now let's open VS Code and see like what's actually happening. Is this? Okay. Let's close this. I'm just going to drag this folder into VS Code. If you guys didn't know, you can do that. It's pretty nice. Okay, cool. And now we're looking at the exact same React app that we saw on Tuesday. So just as a recap, again, we have all these like node modules, which are basically like automatically imported things, a bunch of libraries, a bunch of dependencies. So a bunch of stuff that we rely on to essentially allow our React app to run. We have some public folder, which is giving us our index.html. Again, we see this like root div, which is what we're injecting our everything that we wrote in our JSX into. We see like some icons here that are being displayed on the page. The public page, not that interesting to us other than the index.html. If you look back in the source, we see we have some app.css, some index.css, which we can assume that maybe app.css is governing app and index is governing index. We look at our app.js, sorry, let's look at our index.js first. And we're importing a bunch of stuff. We can read here, we're importing React because it's a library. We're importing it to see because we want to work with it. We're importing the React DOM so we can interact with the virtual DOM, which is something I was talking about on Tuesday. The reason why React is so fast is because we have our own type of DOM. We're not using the regular HTML DOM. I talked about that on Tuesday, and we're importing it, and the library is here so we can work with them. We're importing index.css so we can use it to kind of govern the styles that are happening on this page. And again, so we're importing it here, but in our head, we have to think, okay, this CSS that we're importing here, the style sheet is working globally. So if I wanted to create a module to only allow it to influence this component, I would then have to go into index.css. I would rename this to index.module.css, and then I'd import it here as index.module.css, and it would only influence this component. I'm importing app from app because I want to reference it. And again, app is another component that we defined in our source. And then I'm rendering it onto the page. So I'm loading this app component here. And then I'm saying document.getElementById. So then our document, as you guys know, is like working with the DOM. We're trying to find the document where being like the document that we're interfacing with on the DOM. And we're saying getElementById root. So we're getting this element here, this div root, and then we're injecting our app, which is wrapped by this React.strict_mode component. You guys can read about it if you want. It's basically saying like we're running under like certain conditions. You guys can read about it in React if you want. It's not that interesting. But the interesting thing is that we're loading this app component. So if we look into our app component, again, we see the same thing. We see we have some import statements here. We're importing this logo from logo.svg so we can display it here. We're importing app.css because we want to govern this component with that app style sheet. And then we're defining some functional component and we're exporting it here. So, you know, again, I can write some JavaScript here. And then if I wanted to just like delete everything here, I'm like, I don't care about any of this like React stuff that's going on. I'm just like, I just want to have a page that holds X in some header, and that's all I want to display on my page. So if I open up my terminal and I'm like, all right, let's see what's going on. Five, which is exactly what we thought would happen. Now, let's like define some button here. Let's say we want some button, and let's say we wanted to say like click me. Oops. Oh yeah. So when you're returning JSX, you guys also have to note that JSX expressions can only have one parent element. So essentially we can't line up a bunch of like tags next to each other. So we can either do two things. One, we can nest everything in some like div element. Oops. In some div element. So we're only returning one div and we're nesting the H1 and the button in here. So if you look, we have some like click me button, it does nothing. And this like H1 tag here, which is holding in the value from this X variable that we created earlier. Or you can do something known as fragmenting, which is basically saying that like we don't want to wrap it in anything, but we're just wrapping it in some like empty tags. And this actually performs the same desired result, which is our code isn't going to error. We're only returning one parent JSX element, but it's still loading the same. So yeah, this is all, again, all we have in our app component. It should be like fairly easy to understand right now. Is this all making sense? Are there any questions at all? There's like anything you guys don't understand about how index is loading in app, how HTML is loading in our JSX? Any questions at all? Okay. Apparently you guys are all experts at React already, so we can get into the more fun stuff. So let's talk about Chakra. So again, a little bit ago, I just talked about component libraries and why they're so useful. And again, Chakra is a component library that's super, super useful. I mean, I literally use it every single day to this day. Like we're teaching it to you guys now, so you guys don't have to go through all like the trial and error of component libraries and see which one works and which one doesn't. This one's pretty cool. So the first thing we're going to do, just open up, just look up Chakra, or sorry, it's not going to look up Chakra UI. And you're going to find this like Chakra UI website. You can click on it, click on Get Started. And if you guys want to like go through an extensive tutorial with Chakra UI, I would recommend this one that they have on the website. I went through it myself a couple weeks ago. It was like really nice. Now I'm using it every day. So like, I love Chakra. It's honestly amazing. And then let's look at, let's see, create React app. And then let's see how we're going to import Chakra, the library, into our app. So they have this command right here, which is essentially saying we want to use Chakra UI, and we're going to like install it in all these libraries, so we're going to be able to use them. So let's open up our VS Code. I'm going to close out of my server. I'm going to close my server basically by saying Control C, and then I'm going to run this command here, which is going to install Chakra for me. And I'm going to change something real quick, just to drill into you guys that app is just another component that's automatically created. I mean, we can really name this whatever we want. Let's just call this like Chakra example, and let's switch this to Chakra example. So we're creating some function Chakra example and we're exporting it. And now the only thing that's missing is an index. We're calling like some app, but this isn't actually app at all. It's some Chakra example. So let's go import Chakra example. And then if we click tab, it'll automatically import it from app. And then it's like app isn't defined. You have no idea what this is. I'm like, it's not called app anymore. It's called Chakra example. And we close out component like that. This is essentially, oh, and then, sorry, let's rename this to Chakra example.js. And boom, we switched over. I already switched to import, so it's fine. And now we effectively changed app to just be named Chakra example. Again, it's just some component. We can define a million components. We can define a component and then use it in Chakra example. That's why React is so powerful. It's because we can really use it anytime we want. Okay, cool. So now Chakra is installed, and we can also, the reason why I like Chakra so much is we can just like browse through the documentation, and it's like really nice, organized documentation that I want to look through. So Chakra has something called title, or maybe it's called heading. Yeah, heading. Chakra has something called heading, which is essentially the same thing as like an H1 tag, but it has some attributes that are already predefined and preset so that we can just take the heading and we can use it however we want. And it's already, we don't have to deal with like ugly styling or like how it looks and it's like super ugly, right? So, okay. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to, very conveniently, it has like our import line already here ready for us. We're just going to copy this. We're going to go into our Chakra example and we're just going to paste it in. And boom, we can delete this line. The nice thing I told you guys about Prettier, it's going to tell you like when you're using something, but it's never defined. So logo is defined, but never used. It's like, thank you. I don't care about logo anymore. I don't want to support React's marketing anymore. I just want to do my own application. So I'm saying import heading from Chakra UI React. And I'm like, okay, cool. Now let's look at this. So we have this H1 tag. If I open up our local host where our website was running, it's like, this looks like pretty ugly. I don't know, maybe something can change if we add a heading component. So let's say we have some heading component and let's do the exact same thing, which is just pass in X, save. And then let's run our React app again by npm start. Okay. We reload our page. Oops. Can't resolve app. Chakra example. CSS. Okay, let's do. Oh, I see. Okay, wait. Let's just take this out. Okay. Let's rerun this. I basically just took out the import of the CSS file. I think that was what's erroring. Nope. Oh, source.index.js. Oh, Chakra example from app. Okay, that's why. We have to call it Chakra example. It's, oops. In our import statement, I've imported it and then I changed the name. So it was looking for Chakra example inside of some file name called app, but then we changed that to Chakra example. So we have to change this again to say Chakra example. Okay, that's why. This is fine. I can save this CSS here. This does not exist. So let's go app.css. But honestly, it's useless because we already like